What is up, guys? Welcome to the Way of the Wise YouTube channel. If you have yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe and like button to go and get more content on masculinity and pulling from fields of psychology and history and philosophy and so on and so forth. Dan Bilzerian. What do I say about this man? So if you guys didn't see Dan Bilzerian, he did a podcast with one of my favorite speakers, and I love his show, Patrick Bet-David, PBD podcast. And Patrick had Dan on, and they were having a conversation on monogamy and all this stuff. And funny enough, which I actually agree with. Obviously, it's clear. It's hysterical coming out from a guy who quite literally lived the Playboy lifestyle, super polyamorous, party, girls, women, all of it, and literally goes on and says, and it's said multiple times, it's not the first time he said it, where he has mentioned that monogamy is better, less stressful, and more natural. And so it's funny. I applaud him for that because it's true. It's fundamentally true. You can look at the studies, it is pretty clear so far from the data that monogamy and monogamous relationships typically have better outcomes as it relates to general happiness and satisfaction and sexual satisfaction and so on and so forth. And that usually the ability to couple, neurologically speaking, to neurologically couple with an individual and to commit to someone is much more difficult when you are polyamorous, because you have so diversified and sort of numbed your brain that realistically it becomes much more difficult to emotionally couple with someone. And so I'm not surprised that probably what we would say the Genghis Khan of today, if anyone represents that lifestyle, it would be a guy like him. And coming out and saying this, I think it's very refreshing and it's awesome. But I'm not here to talk about specifically that. What I'm here to reference and talk more so about is within that conversation between PBD and Dan, I would say relatively, it didn't take long, 20, 30 minutes, give or take, maybe sooner. I can't remember off the top of my mind, but where they start going over politics. And this is really where the conversation goes south. And it goes south, and it's frustrating for me, mostly because I find it to be the greatest example of the Dunning-Kruger effect that we can actually see today. Now, if you don't know what the Dunning-Kruger effect actually is, and there's going to be a wise principle at the end of this to kind of share in relationship to this, but the Dunning-Kruger effect, in short, is where you perceive yourself as knowing more than you actually do. And maybe because you maybe studied more than the average individual. So because the average individual is quite literally average, you are perceptively more knowledgeable than a majority of people. So then you perceive yourself as much more intelligible in that particular topic, but then you put yourself next to someone else who actually is extremely well studied and scholarly in relation to the topic. You actually look like a novice. It would be the example of, okay, if majority of people, if you were to kind of create a parallel situation, if majority of people are, let's just say, Little League basketball, and then you've got a guy who is high school basketball. In comparison, you destroy everyone, because you're talking Little League basketball players versus, you can take on an entire team all on your own. If you were to kind of parallel that in today's society, when it comes to political knowledge on history or mathematics or business, then the reality of the fact of the matter is that you know more than most. But the problem in that particular situation is that the people who know more than most, but don't know more than the people who know the most, are also the most marketable. And a guy like Dan Bilzerian, he's very charismatic, he's well spoken, and he's controversial personality. So with all these dynamics, it's more marketable because the people who typically know the most are usually more nuanced, and they're usually not as marketable because they don't have the personality, the charisma, the dynamics to actually be more viral when they're typically more educated. It's usually the guy in the middle who doesn't know enough and nowhere near as much as the guy who knows the most, but certainly more than most. And so what ends up happening is that individual ends up capturing way more of the kind of collective psyche than the person who knows astronomically more. And so what does this all have to do? Well, that's the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's a clear example within Dan. Now, how do I know that? Because I myself am not an expert. I do not claim to necessarily understand everything that is going on in the Gaza situation. And I also want to make this very clear. I am not interested in the cancellation of Dan Bilzerian or Candace Owens or anything of that matter. I'm not interested in it. I think anyone can question whatever it is that they want. I'm a big proponent of freedom of speech, and fundamentally, if we want to deal with bad speech, we deal with bad speech with better speech. That's just the principle that I want to live by, that I seek to live by. But when I look at Dan, it's a clear example of Dunning-Kruger effect, and the reason why I know that, and I would actually probably say that Dan knows probably more than me, because I'm looking into other topics right now. This is not necessarily a topic of focus for me right now. I'm eventually going to get into it. But how I know that Dan is literally within the Dunning-Kruger effect is, in fact, within that podcast conversation between him and Patrick Bet-David, literally there was a confession. And within that confession, you actually hear, and I don't want to bring it up on my phone, because I don't have a mic yet for this, so I don't want there to be echoes or whatever it may be in terms of the audio quality. But this is not an exact quote, but within the podcast, it's very clear. Dan admits that this is something that he didn't know was going on, and something that he, in his words, recently had come to realize. As it relates to Israel, Gaza, and as it relates to his stance on Israel when it comes to Israel and his perspective being the antagonizer, the villain within the storyline. You can see him being much more defensive and protective of Hamas, which I don't actually understand that. And the other reason why that, while I would say I'm not informed on the particular situations that are going about within this, but I do have from personal experience being around Jews and then also being around Muslims. You never really hear of a Jew going on and shooting up a mosque versus vice versa. You do hear of mosques. I mean, I was at the San Bernardino shootings. I took an evangelism team that we went out literally a day, 2 days after the shooting had happened, where the two shooters from the mosque, we actually went to the mosque. The shooters actually attended and shared the gospel with the imams and prayed for them, and crazy things that happened at the time. We never hear of a situation where, like, Jews are randomly just shooting up, a mosque, so to speak. Not saying that it does not happen, but the prevalency of it happening is not nowhere near as much. When I look at the history between the Crusades, the Catholic Church, as it relates to the Ottoman Empire, that's an interesting aspect of history, because we always hear that Catholics are so evil that they killed a bunch of people during the Crusades, which is true. But if you understand the rationalization behind what was going on, and the fact that during that time, Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, Turkey, literally was being taken over by the Ottoman Empire, which they had slaughtered and killed a bunch of Catholics. I mean, by the time that the Crusades were actually initiated, 75% of the territory of that was predominantly Christian Catholic was taken over. Their cathedrals were destroyed and replaced with mosques. And so, if someone comes into my house, I can understand the rationalization of the fact that, like, if someone comes in and let's just say, we in America or in the UK or wherever it is, let's just say a particular territory, China or whatever, goes and enters the borders of America or whatever it is literally trying to do an invasion, I would understand if there's war. Like, that's a little logical, if you randomly just all of a sudden are trying to take over America and, you kill 75% of us. It's like, well, in the particular territory to take it over, 75% of America become China. I would understand if there's a war. Like, there's a little bit of, for me, there's some logic there. So when I look at the history of Islam, and when I look at kind of the dynamics of the past with the Ottoman Empire, also Muhammad and his history, I can't necessarily say on one end that everything Dan is saying is perfectly incorrect, because any government, including the government of Israel, is probably riddled with corruption. So I'm not surprised by that. But inadvertently, I'm also not in his mentality of thinking Hamas is perfectly innocent. I've literally been to Pakistan, and I've literally been to places where they deal with radical Muslims. And the reality is that no, these aren't people who are just resisting because you're trying to colonize them. Like, these are people who literally hate Jews and hate Christians. And so, I'm not fully sold on his perspective either. I lean, if I'm honest, I lean more to the side that Jews are protecting themselves, and the Jewish state and people have a right to protect themselves. I may be wrong. I'm happy to hear information. I'm certainly not for genocide, whether it's Jewish children or Palestinian children. I am not interested in that. I don't think that's right, and I will never justify it. You'll never hear me justify it. But that being said, the overall rationale, this is where my leaning is. So if you kind of want to know where my leaning is, where my stance is, this is where I lean more towards, simply because of other things that I have studied and looked into, such as the Crusades, such as Islam, because I was doing literally missions to Muslim places. I was literally in Harar, which is the fourth holy capital of Islam. So when people cannot travel to Mecca, I think for Ramadan, usually they will go to Harar in Africa specifically if they don't have money. A lot of people don't have the money to be able to make that excursion, but to make that trek to Mecca, then they will go to Harar. And I lived in Harar for 3 months. And so I was literally taken by police, not knowing whether I would be held with them for months or years or whatever, or just a day or whatever. We were held just for about 4 to 6 hours. I can't remember. It was years ago that it happened. We were sharing the gospel, we were sharing Jesus, and we were taken. And so, when I think about certain dynamics, converting Muslims in a Muslim place versus converting Jews in Israel, I don't think, I might be wrong. I'm not aware of the local laws of Israel, but I'm not, to my knowledge, I don't believe it's illegal to see a Jewish person come to faith. Obviously socially that might not be, people might look down on that socially, but it's not instituted as a form of law, versus in a place where I was, you can get in trouble and be imprisoned for that. And so again, I have not studied the Gaza situation to the way that I would like, but logically putting other pieces of history that I have looked into, I'm not fully convinced that Palestinian specifically, I'm not gonna say Palestinians, but that Muslims are perfectly have their hands clean in this particular situation. Like I said, I lean more towards the fact that the Jewish state is protecting themselves. That being said, I'm not interested in the censorship, but he literally admits within the conversation that he recently looked into this. And then within the conversation later on, he is so vehemently against Israel and protective of Hamas. How? And this goes into the principle of wisdom that I want to leave with you on this video. Have the self-awareness to respectfully look into the data points of every position inside before you go and make a stance on something. I am being, as you've seen, I'm trying to be very careful because I don't know the Gaza-Israel situation. I'm not surprised if Israel has done some really twisted and busted things. I wouldn't be surprised if America has done so many operations and covert things. I'm personally not trusting of America as it relates to 9/11 situation. I'm not, there's plenty of things, Operation Paperclip, Operation Mockingbird. I mean, there's plenty of things that America has done that is valid and proven that we've done that is very corrupt. And so I'm not here being a blind I don't believe in this premise that a lot of Christians believe that, Romans, I think chapter 9 and 11, where it references Israel, that it's like, that doesn't mean we don't call out the corruption of Israel's government and political leadership, because we are supposed to pray for the peace of Israel, and that we are supposed to partner. I can go and have a brother in Christ and he do something really stupid and wrong. I could love him deeply and be like, yo, that was effed up. That was wrong. That is evil, and that is not okay, and that is never okay. While also genuinely loving that person and being like, I support you and I want you to win. I don't know why we can't have that nuanced, balanced perspective around the fact that like both can be true. I can partner and believe and love Jewish people and love Israel and love the land of Israel, while also saying that corruption is not okay in anyone, period, including myself. Corruption is not okay in me. Evil is not okay in me. Evil is not okay in America and the American political leadership. Evil is not okay in Israel. And Israel, at the end of the day, evil is evil is evil is evil, period. And as a believer, I will never justify evil because that's my team. At the end of the day, we need to be willing, if we're truly following the way of the master, the way of Jesus, he is willing to challenge the political state and leadership, and he's willing to challenge his own. How many times? And he challenged his own more. He challenged Israel more than pagans and Samaritans. I mean, you see that constantly, and it's radical and it's wild. And so I have to be honest with my own people as well, and the people that I love, as well as my quote unquote enemy. And I can correct my enemy and challenge my enemy, but quite literally, if you look within the Gospels, the corrections that Jesus was bringing about were more severe towards his own people than it was, his enemies, the Roman state. He didn't correct. Now, John the Baptist, to balance this out, John the Baptist did rebuke and confront Herod. So I'm not saying that you never rebuke the enemy or whatever it may be. But the emphasis of the personhood of Jesus is shown in the fact that he is willing to confront his own. And so I'm not interested in this weird political alliance using the Bible and saying that I cannot correct the state of Israel, the government of Israel, for the evils that it may have secretly done, because I'm supposed to support Israel and the people, the Jewish people. I can love Jewish people and the Jewish tradition and Israel as a place, as a holy land, and honor it for being that, and honor it for the oracles of God that it quite literally gave to my people, Christians, while simultaneously saying the political leadership and the governmental state of Israel has done a lot of evil things. And so that's why I'm not interested in censoring individuals like Candace or Dan, because, like I said, I don't know, but let's just say hypothetically 98, 95% of what they're saying is crap. 5% of it may be gold and may be true. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it. Maybe it's 90% is true and 5% of it's false, or 10% of it's false. I don't really know. But the lesson in all of this is you have to discern where you are in the spectrum of actual expertise that you have. I'm not an expert in this particular situation. Don't ask me in the comment section down below. Don't ask me about what do you think about that, because I don't know. I haven't looked at it. I haven't discerned it. I haven't educated myself enough. I'm willing to. I'm open to. But in light of that, the measure of intensity of my opinion will be only to the measure of honest, true education around the particular subject. I have not looked into it. I'm not going to talk intensely and say Israel did this or Palestinians did that because I haven't looked into it. I haven't looked into the data. Facts over feelings, and if we're going to really be about that, then we have to look at the facts. So when I look at the facts, i.e., I haven't looked at the facts, I'm not going to have such an intensity. Dan, on the other hand, somehow is able to simultaneously, and I don't know if this is all because of it. This is the polyamorous brain when you have so sexually exposed yourself, you have diluted your capacity to logically think through things. And so when you look at it, I don't know how in 10 minutes earlier you admitted that you literally, number one, he admitted that he doesn't read books. He's not really interested in reading books. It's like hard for him. And then, so he admits this in this podcast, like, just get this, guys. He admits this in this podcast. He also admits that, like, he literally just started research looking into this stuff recently. His used specific word, I do remember, he used this specifically recently within that podcast. So let's just say within the past month, 2-3 months. And yet vehemently, aggressively, staunchly against Israel, like to the point where he's literally saying the world will be a better place without the state of Israel. How do you do that? Like, I don't know, and I'm not willing to say Dan is dumb, unless he is. He's just like a dumb guy that got lucky because he's good at one specific thing. And that one specific thing was gambling poker. And that is how he hit his jackpot. Okay, maybe he's dumb. I don't think he's dumb. I think he's smart, which means that he should be smart enough to be self-aware enough to be able to recognize, hey, I have not looked into this enough. I should at least be a little bit more conversational and open with a guy like Patrick Bet-David, who Patrick seems to me to be a guy who is honest, who is willing to look at the facts of both sides, who's willing to look at genuinely the diverse set of evidence and opinions, even if it's against, he's clearly more conservative leaning, but even if it may be like, conservatives traditionally, are supportive of Israel's government. And maybe it's like, I find him to be someone who who has more integrity to be able to look at all sides of the coin and look at the evidence. And so when I look at that, and when I look at Dan's response, he is so staunch against him, and it's just wild. And so, guys, we have to, if we want to create a better society of people and better human beings and have a society of men who truly live in wisdom, you have to be honest with yourself about where you're at on particular topics and particular situations. Wisdom means discerning your own foolishness. It means discerning your own capacity to be foolish, and that we are all capable of being fools. The greatest of wise recognizes their own instinct and innate capacity to be a fool. And the more you are aware of your own foolishness, the more you are hedged against that foolishness to therefore be capable of high levels of wisdom. In the same way, the people who are the most villainous and evil are typically the individuals who are the most naive and don't perceive evil to be within themselves. The individuals who typically go and they usually they observe and understand that evil is within them. Alexander, I think Solzhenitsyn was the one that goes on and says that the line of good and evil is lives within all of our hearts. And so understanding that we all have that mixture of evil and good on the inside of us. And so and those who are understanding of that reality, they are able to therefore fortify themselves against their own evil tendencies and have more self-control versus those who naively presume and are only aware of the evil outside of themselves in the world and not aware of the evil that lives within. And so we have to be aware. We have to be self-aware. We have to be aware of the areas that we are genuinely wise in and genuinely foolish in. Don't ask me for my own advice related to this particular situation because I believe I'm a fool. in this particular situation, and I don't want to come off as an individual who is presumptive, not informative. I want to be genuinely informative, not presumptive, which requires me to be honest about where I am, about the degree of knowledge I have about a particular subject. When you talk to me about marketing, when you talk to me about certain subjects related to that, when you talk to me about, let's just say, spiritual development, or theology, or elements or aspects of theology, I am very confident to be more aggressive on some things, because in the world of theology, in the world of philosophy, in the world of psychology, and in respect to communication and marketing and persuasion, persuasion, I've been looking into that for 7 to 8 years. And then when it comes to theology and philosophy, it's been north of about 16 years, 16 coming up on 17 years. So those are areas that I have a lot more expertise on. And my information is I believe is much more credible, because of the fact that I've genuinely looked into these things in aggressive detail, and I've experienced that. I'm still a practitioner. I have a marketing agency where we run marketing for our clients, and write copy and do all the messaging stuff. So realistically, those are areas I feel confident in. Other areas, other topics, there might be, out of scale of 1 to 10, I might be a 5 in this area, I might be a 4 or 2 in this area, I might be a 6 or 7 in this area. But we have to be honest with ourselves. And to close this video off, we have to be wise, and we have to have the self-awareness of, don't be like Dan. Don't be like Dan, who literally admits that on one end, this is new for him. And on the other end, being staunch about your own particular position and understanding related to something. At the end of the day, yeah, no, don't do that. That is not the way of wisdom. That is foolishness. And there is nothing wise in presuming yourself to be an expert when you literally, like Dan, admit that you just looked into this. Be honest with yourself, be truthful with yourself. And when you're truthful and honest with yourself about your own foolishness, that's when you are paving a way for you to genuinely become wise in something. Don't be like Dan Bilzerian. Be actually wise. Follow the way of the wise. I'll see you in the next video. Hit that subscribe button. Talk soon.